What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of 7 Team's live pod, here to talk about patch 13.23, what's going into it, why this stuff's into it, and just some stuff to talk about. Okay, first up, I want to give a preamble, though, about a couple of different topics that I think are useful. If you want to skip past this, of course, you can. I will highlight the topics I'm talking about, and hopefully that's good enough for you. So I want to give a thank you to two sections of people. Very specifically, one, everyone who has been kind and encouraging and giving me like encouragement. It's been a very strange couple of weeks of a lot of toxicity, and so I really appreciate people who have been consistently positive and helpful, or just those who have like come out and been like, well, I've been seeing this stuff, I'm going to come out and try to be positive and helpful. I really appreciate that. Thank you for everyone who's been kind and just tried to be uplifting. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. The second thing I want to give thanks to is those of you who have been watching these videos and have been helping to spread this information out, correcting misinformation. I've seen a lot of people will just say things that are just fact checkably untrue, and this gets upvoted on the subreddit, and it's just mind-boggling. And then there's some who will maybe charitably they misinterpreted, or they're just being malignant. But I appreciate everyone who steps in and helps to correct the record and says, well, no, here's what was actually said, or here's what he said a month ago or whatever. I really appreciate those of you who've come out and helped to spread knowledge and fix information. I really appreciate that. So thank you to everyone who has been a positive part of this community. I really appreciate that. The second section I will say here is that I am more or less going to quit social media for the immediate future. The amount of toxicity has risen so sharply that it's not worth me seeing the occasional useful comment amidst all the death threats. So, is what it is. Let's move on to the next thing. I want to talk about giving feedback. So, this is not about anything particular, to be clear. This is, in general, one thing I've noticed over the years, both before joining the design team and now afterwards, is players kind of suck at giving feedback. And I would like to give a very short coaching session on giving useful feedback. So I will start with an extra preamble, which is people are pretty good at identifying problems. They are very bad at identifying solutions. Identifying solutions to complex problems is a very difficult skill. It is an art, not a science, and it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of work. I'm not saying I'm perfect here by any means, but I will say that I'm better at it than average when I look at the types of people that the types of comments posted on Reddit and Twitter, and it's like anyone who says like I can fix the game in 3 days, you're wrong. I immediately know you're not smart if you think that. But regardless, I can't either, but at least I know that, right? I'm one step further on the Dunning-Kruger curve than the person who thinks that they can fix the game instantly. Regardless, I want to talk about giving feedback in an effective way. So the type of comment I see more often than not, it is by far the most frequent version of feedback I see, is my champ sucks. And this is like pretty objectifiably disprovable. Basically, every champion in League of Legends is either a meaningful pro play pick, which means the best players in the world think this champion is good. And maybe they're wrong. They have been before. There's plenty of stuff the pros get wrong, absolutely. But like, the best players in the world think this is good, so I mean, they're more likely to be right than you are. Doesn't mean they're always right, though. They of course, again, can be wrong. Or their high win rate in some matchmaking band, at least. Shyvana is not a strong jungler in Challenger. She's not a strong jungler in Masters. She's not really a strong jungler in Diamond. But she's very, very good in Iron through Gold. And she's actually still quite good in, like, Platinum Emerald. And so when there's the chain of comments of, like, XD, no Shyvana buffs, it's like, yeah, she's one of the strongest champions in the game for about 80% of players. This champion isn't bad. She's bad in your games. And this is not correctable by mastery. She has a relatively shallow mastery curve. This is the type of champion that she is. Just doesn't perform well in higher elo games. That's too bad. But this doesn't mean your champion sucks. It means this champion sucks in your games. And this is not like she sucks for you. It's like, no, just the environment of high diamond masters, GM, challenger games is not conducive to Shyvana. That is true. Like that's factually accurate. But this does not mean your champion sucks. That's just not how that works. Secondary topic, we'll jump on the hot button issue of Riven recently, where the comments I see about Riven are that Riven sucks. And it's like, well, again, Riven doesn't suck. There is a large matchmaking back. It's funny. It's the opposite of the Shyvana effect. The Shyvana players say Shyvana sucks. The Riven players say Riven sucks. Combined, they each cover the entire swath of the game at like a 52% win rate. You have the Masters Plus crowd, where Riven is actually one of the best performing top laners in the game, and you have the like Sub Emerald crowd, where she's one of the best performing junglers in the game. That's Shyvana, and I guess kind of at like exactly Diamond, I think they're both kind of mediocre. So unless you're like exactly Diamond, nope, not how this works really, right? Anyway, that's a weird tangent around mastery curves and win rate with MMR. That's not really the point here. And the point is not even really about win rate itself. This is just to say that, like, well, this champion wins more games than they lose in at least one section of the player base. And not like a small section, like the entire cohort of Diamond Plus, Riven wins more than half of her games. That's a fairly large number of players. And it's also one that a lot of players purely focus on because they only look at like relatively high elo matchmaking stuff. And of course, if you go to like Masters Plus, it's even better for Riven. She becomes one of like the 6 best top players in the game. Whatever. Sorry, most performant top players in the game. She wins a lot of games. Whatever. Let's get on to the point that I'm actually trying to give here, which is saying my champion sucks. Saying your champion sucks isn't useful. There's nothing good there other than someone on the internet said they didn't enjoy playing their champion anymore. Pretty much what that means. And that's very useless. That's incredibly, incredibly useless. I do not care that some random person on Reddit is having fun playing their favorite champion anymore. And they're blaming it on the champion being weak, which is probably not the case. Just in general, right? What you can say that is useful, like I will dive into my little rabbit hole of what I think are some actual core problems with Riven that could be solvable. So Riven is a very, very snowbally, very high agency champion in the early game. What I mean by that is in the first 10 levels or so, you're locked into a one-on-one with your lane opponent. Yes, the jungler can show up once in a while, but in high elo, junglers spend time bot lane, not top lane. And in low elo, Riven's never been good in low elo. She requires a lot of mastery. This is just kind of the case, right? So I'm just going to like tunnel on like Diamond Plus here because that's really the only skill bracket where Riven's been like a really strong champion because she's always been a high mastery champion. That's just kind of always been true. Okay, let's get onto the topic here, which is when I hear Riven sucks, what I actually think is that Riven is a sharply scaling, high agency, no fallback pattern melee champion with very sharp matchups. And to reiterate, no fallback pattern. So when Riven is in a winning lane, and let's say she gets first blood, she has 4 dashes, 2 stuns, and her basic attack, her passive, her Q, her W, her E, her R, and her second R all scale with longswords. So if you buy a longsword, you scale 7 different parts of your kit. If you want to count each Q, it's 9. That's fraudulent, but 7. There are 7 separate mechanics. Maybe it's 6 because you don't want to count both halves of R, although to be fair, R1 and R2 are really different buttons. But every single one of them scales with a longsword. This champ has 4 dashes and 2 stuns and 7 different parts of her kit that scale with a longsword, which means if she gets ahead, she gets really ahead, and you don't have breathing room. You're locked in a lane with her. She can chase you down. She'll stun lock you, and every single one of her buttons gets more powerful. She has a 0 mana cost shield. You can't poke her. You can't run away. She has more dashes than you. You can't probably CC chain her. Slows don't affect her. She has dashes. This is not to say Riven is actually overpowered XD Lamau. This is to say that when Riven gets ahead, she gets really ahead. This is just a truth about this champion, right? This is just a truth about this champion, which means when Riven is overtuned, as she was, for example, when she first came out, and people were like, oh my gosh, she has a shield with an AD ratio? What kind of bullshit is this? How am I supposed to win? That's not really incorrect. You're phrasing it a little bit wrong, but it's like, yes, this champion scales really, really, really sharply with gold, and has really good target access and really good kill pressure. She is a very high agency champion with very high gold scaling, which makes her very, very volatile. On the other side, Riven's bad matchups have no recourse. All of her buttons are melee. Sure, she might be able to withstand some of the ranged matchups by saying, okay, I'm getting Teemo poked, or Kennen poked, or Gnar poked, and I can use dash to stay out of range. I can go in and clear the wave. I can use my E shield to block some of the damage. She can go Doran's Ring. She can go Doran's Shield. She can go Second Wind. Right? She has okay base health regen now. It used to be really high, used to be really low, whatever. She has okay health regen. And so this means that, she can withstand those lanes kind of, but you put her in a melee champion, Renekton, I think, is the very commonly chosen option here. But, like, even if the lane is not... To be fair, I don't know her matchup tables, right? So I don't know if, like, she's supposed to win Jax or Gwen or Singed or... I don't know, actually. But I do know that against any of the melee champions, if she's behind, she cannot last hit without being in threat range of those champions. And let's say it is supposed to be a winning matchup, but she got ganked, or there was a misplay, or an outplay, or whatever, and now she's behind in gold. Winning the matchup doesn't matter because you're in melee range. If you press Q1, Jax is punching you. You press Q2, Singed is already flinging you. You press Q3, doesn't matter. They still outtrade you with, the Cassante or whatever. Who knows? Because Riven doesn't have a fallback pattern, right? You compare to someone like Rumble. Rumble has a fallback pattern. He can use his flame spitter from far away. He can use his harpoons, right? Like, Rumble can use them from behind, and like even if he's losing, Mundo can throw cleavers, Gragas can throw barrels, right? You can do something. Gnar, Teemo, as long as you're not getting outright tower dove, as long as you're not so far behind, you are instantly dying under tower, which of course can happen in some matchups where you get really far behind and now not even your tower can save you. Most champions have recourse. Riven doesn't, right? Riven has to walk into range of Darius to last hit, and Darius full combos her for 800 damage. She might live, but that's a recall, and she got 2 CS for it. Or she can only get XP and maybe last hit under turret. Sorry, the enemy top laner froze on you. You can die to break the freeze. That's your recourse, right? You can stand in XP range, or you can die to break the freeze. And maybe you can't even stand in XP range, who knows? That's Riven, right? And that to me is a sort of more useful synopsis, and maybe not in so many words, right? But if the feedback is, as Riven, actually, here's one more thing that actually matters here. This is actually really, really important. It's actually part of this that really matters. Right now, Riven appears to be a late game skewed champion, which means on average, her early games are weak. Now, they are high agency, high volatility, but on average, they are losing, which means what most Riven players experience in the current version of League of Legends, in the current metagame, which is her, typical lane opponents, is that she has nothing to do in losing matchups, taking the L in lane for 14 minutes straight, and then finally playing out the back half of the game from a gold deficit, but in a hopefully okay position. That does not sound like a fun way to play League of Legends, right? This sounds like you're opting in to play Kayle without the guaranteed level 16 promise. And in fact, Riven's late game is actually somewhat lower. So here's the weird dichotomy here. Riven appears to be a scaling pick in the sense that she doesn't tend to force 15 to 20 minute surrenders. Games that end quickly tend to be games that Riven has lost, which means she doesn't. I'm taking this to mean I have not looked at like her gold difference data. I could find it, but I haven't looked at that, right? So this I am extrapolating a bit from observable data here. I could find better stuff, but this is just like a tangent that I want to talk about, even though I don't have the full picture here. Okay, so just I am believing this to be true. This is what I observe, though of course I am not a Masters Riven player. What I observe is Riven appears to be on the losing end of early games more often than not. Which means, right, you are playing this champion that has very volatile, high agency lanes, but you're on the losing end of that agency every time, or almost every time. Most of the matchups are bad for you early game. And then you go into the late game, and with someone like Kayle, right, if you're playing Kayle, you're like, I know I have no agency in the early game, and I know I'm not going to win the early game. I'm going to take a back seat, I'm going to do nothing, and I expect this out of myself. And then we get to the mid game, I become ranged, I get rank 2 of the passive, okay, I got to 16, now I'm the best top laner in the game, and I opted into this payoff. This is part of the promise of why I play Kayle, right? This is literally like expressly part of the kit, is that there was a level 16 power spike that is very obvious, and not every player wants to play like that, but it is an opt-in experience that is very clearly promised by the entire kit conceit. And there is a player base that is like, that's how I want to play the game. And that is totally fine, and we can embrace that, and that is totally reasonable. And you get to the late game, and your agency goes up, because Kayle is a very, very good late game team fighter. Her ulti is amazing, her auto attacks are amazing, she is good late game. Riven does actually scale, like she has very good gold ratios, which means if she can get over the hump and get into 2 to 3 items, she will convert gold to power better than typically other top laners, right? So that, when we get into mid game or late game, whatever, and we have 10, 11, 12, 13,000 gold, Riven uses that 13,000 gold better than other champions use that 13,000 gold. Like, that is true about this champion. It's not Kayle tier. She's not Tryndamere tier with like the, purely multiplicative scaling, but it's still very high. She's one of the stronger top laners with gold. This, of course, ties into snowballing, of course, but whatever. The thing about that, though, is Riven is a fairly squishy melee fighter. She is strong, but she is low agency late game, right? Kayle has very long attack range and vulnerability ultimate with a ton of burst damage onto it, and just a lot of tools to space and play as a functional late game marksman with enough free damage on her kit to keep up with marksman's multiplicative scaling. With like just Natural Tooth and a Death Cap, she's doing the same kind of stuff that like Kai'Sa can do in a lot of cases. Riven has to be melee and doesn't have Tryndamere ultimate, which makes it very hard to play your champion when Malice just laughs and presses R on you and goes, nice agency, bro, Lamau. You scale with gold, have a suppression. Hope you build a Quicksilver Sash. And so this is what I believe, like the sort of thesis of why playing Riven feels bad right now. I'm sure I'm wrong in some parts here. I believe I'm wrong in some parts here. In fact, this is the kind of thing that I would rely on actual Riven players to tell me the parts of the game that feel weird. But my theory, and please feel free to write in with your actual feelings here, is that all of her agency is in the early game, but she's bad there. She's bad in the early game where her agency is the highest. And to be fair, if she had the highest agency of the game, she would get freaking permabanned because everyone would hate laning against her. So we have to be pretty delicate there, I would bet, long term. But if we got there and said, you have a lot of agency in the early game, but you're like the average top laner, so you're going to have some good matchups and bad matchups, they're going to be equal. You're going to have the Dariuses and the Renekton's, but you're also going to have a bunch of lanes that you're happy about. Like, you're going to go ahead and beat Rumble, and you're going to beat Jax, and you probably don't beat Cassante, probably, because he just buys armor and wins, but you're going to have enough good matchups that, okay, there's good lanes and bad lanes, but you feel good half the time instead of 20% of the time. That shape probably feels way better for Riven for the exact same win rate. And that's the kind of information I wish players would give instead of my champ sucks. I think I'm right about most of this. I would love the corrections here. I would love the discussion here. But what I'm asking about is you to say things like, I'm not having fun playing Riven because it feels like all of my laning matchups lose. It feels like I am losing all my early games, and I can't do anything about that. I can't win my early games because all my matchups suck in lane. My laning phase is too weak. I feel bad playing the early game. That is great directional, like, here is the problem that I see. Right? I'm not asking for solutions. I'm asking for a concise or specific problem statement. And that is the kind of feedback that is incredibly useful and that I would like players to give more often. So that is the probably 15-minute long preamble on giving good feedback and a treatise, probably the wrong word there as well, on Riven that I'm sure there are holes in because I am not an expert here, but that is what I have observed. Let's move on to the last topic here, which is the fact that this is the live pod of League of Legends. So I just kind of want to like clear up a misconception, I suppose, which is people keep calling it the balance team. Certainly, yes, we ship balance updates, but this is specifically the live pod because we do more than game balance. So for example, the kit updates to Janna and Azir and Rumble were mine as part of the live pod. There's a systems change to turret gold. That's not really a balance change. It is a live gameplay change. When we changed death timers and dragon rewards and whatnot, this was a live gameplay change for overall gameplay health. And so that means that the kind of stuff that we work on as game designers, as a team, is not just balance changes. And this is not to be like, give us more credit or whatever. That's not the point here. The point is to sort of educate that, like, again, we do ship game balance changes, but the point of the team, and really the point of live design in general, is not really balance specifically. The point is making the most compelling game for the most players we can possible. This means that, like, the game may well be more compelling with a 52% win rate Rammus than a 50% win rate Rammus, because Rammus, being good as an AD counter pick, creates richer experiences, right? So him being a strong performer is good. Meanwhile, what I have observed is that when Malphite is strong in every MMR, and he is an observably strong top laner, people are really mad about it, despite being kind of the same niche as Rammus. Malphite is way more complained about. This might be because Malphite plays against you in lane, and so you're constantly against him. And so as a top laner, you are stonewalled from the very beginning. But despite having very similar balance numbers, the experience of the game is different based on the champion itself. I don't think anyone wants to play against a 52% win rate Yone. Because he has a lot of agency over the game and can very quickly opt into choosing to kill you with his significant number of dashes, bonus move speed, and multiplicative damage amps on his kit. He has hard card control, a bunch of stuff, and it's like, well, it probably is more correct for someone like Brand to win on average more often than Yone, because Brand can't take his lead into chain killing you every time his basic spells are up. And so the experience of playing against a relatively balanced Yone is, hey, you win some, you lose some. The experience of playing against a slightly overtuned Brand is, actually, it's fine, because even though he's going to win the games, I'm not getting put in the dirt constantly. And win rate, at the end of the day, is fully zero-sum, right? You can't have every champ at 51. You have to have as many, roughly, 49s, 51s, obviously based on pick rate, whatever, but like, there is an amount of picking winners balance-wise where it's like, actually targeting 50% win rate is not useful. It's not actually what we want to do. It's not what makes the best game. And so it makes, quoting win rate data, I mean, it can tell a story. It can paint a picture. It certainly properly tracks how this champion has performed. And some champs indeed perform better than others and will for long periods of time. And that might still just be correct for the game because it makes for a better League of Legends, even though they're not necessarily balanced. And the idea of being balanced is also, even if we were targeting that win rate, and we did try to do that, and it was actually the goal, balance for whom? Because there's plenty of champions that have very, very shallow mastery curves. Should we balance champions at 5 games of mastery? That seems incorrect. Okay, should we balance at 40 games of mastery? Okay, well, Varus will always have a bad win rate, because most players aren't playing at 40 games of mastery, which means, and Varus, who has, by the way, very, very flat mastery curve, at one point in time, he was literally the lowest in the game. Now I think he's just like bottom 5%. Varus will never have an observed good win rate if we balance around 40 games of mastery. Assuming players like remotely close to that, right? Okay, well, is what it is, right? And that's going to depend based on what MR you're in, right? Actually, we're going to balance around 10 games of mastery in Silver and 50 games of mastery in Challenger. I mean, good luck, we probably could, right? We could probably retune enough kits that we could get pretty close there, but like, is this even the right version of this? What about the idea that champions counterpick each other? And there's just like so many millions of factors here that it's like, we're not even going for balance in the first place. Like, it's not even like a valid discussion. And of course, it's very easy. Like, I understand the desire to like put things into boxes and make them easy to understand. And unfortunately, that's not the case here. These things aren't easy to understand or simple, but I don't really know what the point is, I guess, other than that, like, hey, just sort of reiterating, we are the live pod. We do all kinds of stuff that is not just game balance. There's a lot of structural stuff. I don't know. I don't have much else to say here other than we cover a lot of different things here on this team, on this pod. And so I'm just trying to, again, try to further the conversations here, right? The reason we do a kit update to Janna is not because she's over or underpowered or her balance state is bad. It's to create better gameplay. Like, the point of our team is to make the best gameplay in League of Legends possible. And this could be changing a kit. This could be doing other stuff. And this is why giving feedback, other than my champ sucks, I want 1% win rate, is not terribly useful versus I have too many losing lane matchups. I would like to be close to 50-50. That is a live issue where we can probably go, net 0 win rate change to Riven, but make the experience of playing her a lot better by giving her 50% matchups that she wins and loses instead of 80-20, 70-30, 60-40, whatever it is, right? And so as sort of part of this, as I finally find the point after 5 minutes here, try to think in more terms than just I'm good, I'm bad, because that is not really the work that we do. Okay, let's move forward. Let's talk about the last patch and how it went. 13.22, of course, went out about a week ago. Let's talk about it. We had a slew of buffs. We buffed Remus back up. We buffed Mundo back up as well. These champions both got nerfed in the previous patch. And the nerfs went too hard. We overdid it, and so walking them back a little bit here. Both champions are easy to play, fairly introductory. They are naturally low MMR skewed. As per usual, there is always the ability to do some kit updates. I think Remus is honestly in a pretty good spot. I think he does the right kinds of things. He's moderately damaging. I think that's totally okay. He gets to do something proactive, which I think is actually quite fun. So he ends up being like weirdly a kind of offensive tank. I think that's totally reasonable. Dr. Moon, I think there's actually much more of a compelling pitch for there being a kit update here. I don't know if Mundo needs to be a strongly level scaling champion. He is right now. He might not need the like special rank 3 ulti bonuses that he has, but this would be a larger, longer term project and the kind of thing that right now, as the resources on Summoner's Rift team moves toward the seasonal pod and away from the live pod, right? We have a limited number of QA, and they are now going to be spending more time on the large amounts of updates going into the seasonal update. And we have engineers, they're going to be spending more of their time ensuring that everything is up to quality for the seasonal update. The live pod of these shared resources has fewer resources, and thus we're going to have lower scope changes. At some point, could there be a Mundo kit update? Of course. Would it be good? I hope so. Hope to do the right things here. But hey, by the way, just sort of giving some context that there are going to be largely a lot of sort of fairly simple changes in the near future. Gragas had some small changes here as well. This ended up being a fair bit win rate positive into his jungle. This ended up seemingly being pretty win rate neutral in top lane, which I find kind of odd. Regardless, not much to say here. I mean, this champion we know isn't very strong. It's tough to find the right things to do with Gragas. When he has infinite wave clear with Q, and he has infinite sustain with his passive, that's obviously a very uninteractive kit. Those are the kind of kits that are probably better to leave on the weak side because there's not a lot of gameplay. He can stall almost any aggression because he body slams you. Maybe this champ is supposed to just be a tank, and he's meant to be a sustained tank, and it's meant to be more a little bit like Maokai, where he has like one AP ability, I don't know, or like one AP item he builds demonic, and then otherwise. But again, I don't have a strong version of like what the exploration of Gragas should be. Certainly, he's not in a very strong spot, and unfortunately, hours are limited, time is limited. But certainly, Gragas is not great. I'm sorry that's true. If you're a big Gragas fan, I know he's not very strong. He at least got a small buff here, right? We went above just giving a simple buff, right? The last patch was both the E change and then also just a strict buff to his R. He's still not great. At least he's better than he was, but unfortunately, there's not a lot to say here. I'm sorry if that's not encouraging or what you want, but that is unfortunately where we are right now with this champion. And just the fact that with the seasonal update coming in, it's going to change a lot of stuff. And so it's not worth doing exploration, especially if like build-wise, when the builds are going to change anyway. Whereas like, actually, we think we should make a better version of this kit, regardless of build. That's, more, easier to stomach, right? And easier to kind of plan out. We buffed Brand as well in the prior patch. Sort of striking while the iron is hot. There was certainly an audience for Brand jungle players. We thought we could also shift some more power from support into mid. This ended up being true. Jungle gained the most win rate, then mid lane, then support. Support gained like 0.5%. That's fine. That's within like the power budget we're allowed kind of here. He's certainly a relatively successful support. I think that's okay. I don't really like mage supports being on the strong side. They never see pro play. That's fine. But I think it's discouraging to mid laners. And it's discouraging to AD carries when mages are like strong and in support. It's like, wait, where are our mid laners? And where's and the AD carries like, wait, why are there mages in my lane doing things better than me? Whatever. It is really interesting that we've come to the circle jerk, by the way, of now the best mid laners are mages finally. We went for a while of mages suck, mages suck, mages suck, even though all we saw in pro player mages the entire year. And now it's like, exactly, Ori and Syndra showed back up the meta, and now it's like mages are the best champions of the game. It's like, they've been this way. Like, have you not been watching the pro meta? Like, this is not to say that pro is everything, right? But like, it's wild to me that champs with an observed 50% win rate, which is, to be fair, doesn't mean everything. But when you say like these champs are broken, it's like they win half their games. Use your vocabulary, say the things you don't like about them, and let's move on. Which would be useful, and you can provide that, but like. Again, the prior point about giving feedback. No 50% win rate Orianna is not broken. She's not winning all her games. Please try to explain your thought process here because these champions clearly are not overperforming. They certainly are highly prized in pro play. Granted, valid, totally fair. Regardless, I don't want to jump down that rabbit hole too much. I'm not trying to overfocus on win rates. I'm just trying to say that if your vocabulary is this champ sucks or this champ is broken, you need to use more than that vocabulary. That's kind of all I'm really going for. Regardless, Brand is slightly better in mid than he is in support, which is good. He's a totally viable jungler, which is good, and I'm very happy about that. We nerfed Briar, and it did absolutely nothing. There's basically no observable change in her win rate on day 1 compared to the day before. You basically cannot see these nerfs take effect, which surprised me because statistically we actually know how much of her damage comes from R and Q, and they make up around like 35% of her, I think it's about 30% of her total damage is spell cast damage on Q and spell cast damage on R. Now, Q did not get nerfed until champion level 8, but R got nerfed from the very, very beginning. And both those abilities strictly deal less damage than before. And despite we know that they are a non-trivial portion of her total damage, and that damage went down, this means this champion must be dealing less damage. And in fact, you can actually compare her before and after the patch, and her total damage, in fact, did go down patch versus patch. Like, if you compare point 21 to point 22, Briar does less damage per game than before. Her win rate did not move. I am flabbergasted by that, since Briar is a damage first. Like, this is not like, oh man, Janna's doing more damage this patch. Why isn't she winning more games? Like, well, because her purpose isn't damage. Doi, right? Malphite, etc. are going to be like this. That's totally understandable. Briar is a damage champion who is dealing less damage and not winning fewer games is wild to me. I know some of this is people, of course, are gaining mastery. But this is not like comparing 14 days to 14 days. This is like comparing day 14 to day 1 and nothing changed, which is just truly wild to me this happened. There, of course, can be explanations here. There's, great theories around like break pointing and whatnot, where it's like, she still has enough damage to always kill her target. Or, yeah, the R impact damage less good, but that's fine. She wasn't killing with the W execute. It was, they were either going to lose or win based on placement, like based on where you are on the map and where the teammates were. And, a quarter second faster kill wouldn't have changed anything, which truly apparently seems to be true. Kind of wild, but has been the case here. Regardless, Briar is getting nerfed again next patch because, we did not nerf her hard enough. Hopefully we're doing it correctly next time. Ziggs ended up getting very, very little power taken off overall. 4 armor was basically 1/4% of win rate in both mid lane and bot lane. It did very little overall. Of course, Ziggs is pretty safe in both of these roles. He doesn't take damage that often. Still, though, it would be wild to think that if we scaled this up, if we gave Ziggs 40 more armor, would he really only gain 2.5% win rate? That's what it suggests, right? And I just can't believe that a 62 level, well, I guess it would be, 58 now, but a 60 armor level 1 Ziggs wouldn't just be bonkers. And to be fair, he'd just play differently, right? He would just walk at you and right click you and he'd win. But it's wild to me how little impact this had. But it's apparently true. We're taking different tactics here. We're going to be nerfing Ziggs. Correctly so. But yeah, these nerfs were too small, is what it is. We nerfed Seraphine last patch. In 13.21, we got some of the changes wrong, and we ended up buffing her everywhere, but we disproportionately buffed her too much in bot lane. Which was the one role we were kind of ceilinged by, and so it meant we had to go back and nerf Seraph again this patch. So the end result of 0.22. Now, of course, Seraphine mid and Seraphine bot are not popular champions. You have to wait a very long time to get enough data to be reliable and this kind of stuff. But as it is indicated right now, Seraphine mid, bot, and support, I believe, are all slightly more performant. They are winning slightly more games than they were before, all 3 roles. And she is more popular in each of these 3 roles than she was 4 weeks ago. So the end result of the changes is that there are more Seraphine players, and they're winning more games than before. This was not a tremendous success. We obviously did not get the primary goals, which was to bring bot lane in line with other roles to allow us to just simply buff and nerf the champion. Every single time has to be a trade here where it's we're not trying to leave Seraphine at 49% in support, but we can't when she's 53.5 in bot lane. And of course, no one plays her mid when her better farming roles bot lane by 3% win rate. So why would you play her mid? So I was well, until we can close those gaps, we're kind of trapped. And so it's going to require a version 2 of large scope kit update. We hopefully do it correctly the next time. But in the meantime, Seraphine's win rates are back to roughly where they were. Her play rate is up, which is nice. That's good to see. It means we made a slightly more fun kit, at least one that people are trying to play right now, which is good. But again, work to be done. Nerfs to Graves landed pretty well. Overall, not much to say here. You can make the argument that Graves should live below 50% win rate. In that, he's relatively high agency, he's pretty in your face, he snowballs his leads. This is the kind of champion that should be low win rate. There is an argument there that I think is defensible. But regardless, Graves as a low CC, not the best ganking jungler, is fine. and that seems okay for this point in time. Kassadin nerfs went overall pretty well. He wins more than half his games, but to be fair, Kassadin disproportionately counter-picks more than he is counter-picked. So Kassadin deserves, if you're saying, hey, all champs, we care about 50% win rate, but let's also care about counter-pickiness. If those are the two things you care about, then Kassadin should be above 50. If there are other considerations you care about, that's fine. If you're like, melee mids should be weak, then Kassadin is overtuned for you. I'm not trying to, not gaslight, what's the term? Strawman that argument. I'm just saying that, like, it is reasonable to have other considerations here. Regardless, Kassadin at a bit above 50 seems very reasonable. Senna nerfs landed, as far as I can tell, extremely well. I specifically targeted, I did the Senna nerfs last patch. Now, there's an argument that Senna should not have lost some of her healing because this is what makes her unique among marksmen. But of course, her damage and marksmanness is what makes her unique among supports. I think there is a logical thrust either way on which one is more sacred. You know, her being a really, really good gold scaler, or just a strong scaling support in general, or whatever else. Again, there are totally reasonable arguments here. Regardless, the nerf targets for Senna were things that were disproportionately used well by elite level players. And from data so far, it seems that a lot of Senna's elite skew is gone, which means Senna is a more performant champion in lower MMRs. That's, I think, on average kind of useful. It's not the ultimate goal. It's nice when we can get it. If it's like, we just want to like nerf Senna some, and nothing's really sacred here, okay, well, let's choose tactics that let more players, you know, like if Senna needs to be at 50% win rate in Masters, it would be nice if she wasn't 46 in Silver, right? Because then it's like, well, I mean, that just kind of sucks, you know, that like just kind of feels bad. Senna does not feel like the kind of champion like a, you know, Cassante or Azir, where it's like, we expect you to have an extremely high amount of mastery to play this champion well. Senna does not scream that to me. Senna screams approachable. In fact, she's a very, very popular champion, which means we probably should try to retain her viability in all ranks. Kai'Sa's like this, Ezreal's like this. A lot of marks actually that are like really, really appealing that I think is valuable to not have them be stuck in like high elo jail or pro jail. So Senna appears to be reasonably good in almost all MMRs, which is a nice thing, and I think overall landed well. Okay, great. Janna ended up being nerfed last patch, which is too bad. She went from about 52 to about 50% win rate. Again, not great. Heh, we nerfed her. Again, with everything, it's a team sport. We all chime in. We all get feedback. We do magnitude reads, and we got it wrong in this case, right? We got it wrong. Janna is undertuned right now. Now, there are a couple things here that are relevant. One, Janna's are, on average, still running Glacial Augment when she no longer prints heal and shield power on the kit, which means one of the very obvious Glacial Augment scalers is now gone, which means you should probably go back to the normal enchanter stuff like Aerie or maybe even Guardian. Aerie, of course, very good for a harass-based gameplay. Considering that she's all about using W, getting your face auto-attacking, Aerie very clearly lines up with that entire kit conceit, so I think it's very logical to run Aerie. People have been kind of slow to move off. There's a very clear win rate gain if you switch over to the correct keystone. Similarly, some players are maxing E instead of W. That's fine. We made E max better. We gave it a better shield per rank incentive. But W max Janna appears to be more performant. As with anything like this, the fact that it's the unpopular build always elevates win rates because these are the kind of players who critically think about their champions. Those players tend to win more games. On average, that just tends to always hold true. This is true with recommended items. This is true with rune pages. This is true with skill orders. So the actual degree to which this would change if we did recommended rune pages, recommended skill orders, is actually very, very small, and actually might even flip the other way if we were to do recommended builds. Just to say that people who follow recommended builds deflate win rate by default. So there is some room for skepticism claiming that, well, if you just pick your builds differently, you'll do better. I think that's still true. I do think Janna is better with Aerie and better with WMAX than the opposites here, but I think not by a huge degree. Regardless, we think we can pretty cleanly buff Janna, and so we're doing that this patch. We nerfed Neela. Neela nerf seemed fine. She's still winning plenty of games. This is fine. I think this is reasonable. Neela has a pretty tough laning phase sometimes. These are the kind of champions that we tend to kind of allow to be kind of strong, and no one seems to really mind about it. For example, I mean, here's a fun factoid. Draven has like a 70% ban rate in EU West, and has for like a really long time. In like high elo, Draven is like a 70, like that's wild. That's incredibly high. It's like specifically EU West high elo. Like no other server cluster like MMR bracket has anything close to this, but specifically Draven in EU West high elo is just like 70% ban rate. In general, there's plenty of pockets of players that are like high gold scaling, strong laners are a nightmare, and they just get banned because if they start snowballing, they keep snowballing, and oh boy, that's totally fine. It's how the champions work, but Neela is kind of not that. She's not great at immediately crushing her early lead into doing more. She's okay at it, but it's, it's not like Yasuo where she actually has hard CC before 6. So it's, not so extreme here. Regardless, I think Neela is reasonable to have her be above average. I think that's fine. Final reference to Tahm Kench. I don't think Tahm Kench needs to have a privileged win rate. This champion is fine. He's winning a fairly normal number of games. He lost by 2% win rate last patch. He's 50 and change. That seems fine. I'm still happy with the changes we made to Tahm Kench to give him better gold scaling in an effort to continue to nudge top lane agency up a little bit with time. The better you scale with gold, the more that your performance matters. The more your opponent scales with gold in top lane, the more your performance matters. And so if we continue to nudge top lane and mid lane up in gold scaling, and actually a bit support here as well. I actually want to bring up something, which is bringing top lane, mid lane, and support gold scaling all up, I think does good things for the game. So if we bring up top lane gold scaling, this means that your performance, both yourself and in depriving your opponent of resources, killing them, denying them turret plates, denying them kills, more meaningfully buffs you and hurts them than if you're playing, Malphite versus Ornn, right? Why would anyone ever gank Malphite versus Ornn, regardless of them not being killable, but they don't care about how much gold XP they're getting. They're full power no matter what. Okay, Ornn has some special level scaling, but that's kind of it. He's a scaling laner, but not in terms of getting last hits. He just wants XP. In mid lane, it's just a role where, especially if they care about levels as well, this means leaving lane to give up turret plates. If you're leaving lane to go double kill the bot lane, but you're giving the AD carry the double kill, you're getting 2 75 gold assists. You're getting 1 wave worth of gold, a little bit more, depends on the cannon, far less than 1 wave worth of XP, and your opposing mid laner, got that wave of XP, got that wave of gold, and got a turret plate. So you have fallen behind the opposing mid laner to give your bot laner 600 gold. Now, of course, that's very frequently the correct play as a mid laner. Now, I think team play is important. I think being able to be active around the map is important. But the more it matters for a mid laner to be selfish, this is a couple things. This means the game is less about bot lane because the opportunity cost, your opponent getting perfect CS and a turret plate, is now higher because the enemy Kassadin or the enemy Azir or the enemy whatever uses that gold better than before, than 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 6 months ago or whatever. But it also means that, well, you want that gold, right? You getting only 1 wave's worth of gold doesn't. Why do you care? Why does the jungler gank for your lane, your Azir, your Syndra, your Yasuo, your Akali, you're a high agency mid laner, you're Aurelia? I want the gold, I scale well, pay attention to me. One thing we know is true right now is the higher elo you go, the more you spend time in bot lane. Because right now, bot lane, in fact, does use resources the best. They are the best gold scaling champions of the game. They're also among the most under-leveled champions of the game, so they're really, really frail. And so good teams know how to peel for them, and bad teams don't peel for them. And low elo AD carries are like, everyone tells me I'm overpowered, but I get freaking one-shot by the Riven. What the F, David Blaine? And it's like, hey, well, if we make the game about other people a bit more, then we don't have that topic. We can actually give AD carries, like marksmen, bot lane marksmen, better individual agency, because the game is actually equally about them and equally about Azir and equally about Jax. And not just Jax is okay and Syndra's fine, but it's really about Zeri, right? The other one, as I mentioned, is support, where if we make supports care more about what they have, they are less likely to roam. Now, again, I think roaming is important and valuable, but if you want your honorable duel 1v1 in the top lane, or honorable 1v1 in the mid lane, or you want your honorable duel 2v2 in the bot lane, Rel just leaving to go kill the mid laner and leaving you to fend for yourself, what that does is Rel is walking through the river, right? She's taking an early recall, she's buying boots, she's whatever, she's, showing up to go mid, and she's missing a wave of XP and missing a wave of gold. She still has 3 relic shield stacks, whatever. She's just not growing gold income because, she doesn't care. What doesn't scale with gold? Thresh doesn't scale with gold. None of these champions scale with gold. They don't care what they have. It's did I get max rank Janna shield? I'm full power, baby. Let's go. Level 6 onwards, we're done. Right? Nothing about Rel changes when she gets past level 6. Her stun durations are all the same. Her CC combos are all the same. Nothing changes past level 6. This is actually part of why Rel jungle is so good in pro play, because pro plays really low econ in the jungle, and Rel doesn't need resources to do her entire kit's job. It's not necessarily a problem on an individual kit level, but on a role level, it's oh, Supports just shouldn't ever get resources. Why would they care? They don't use them anyway. So why would I bother soaking XP? Why would I bother doing a good job last hitting other than to get my sites online, which, like, matters a little bit, but like, whatever. I'm just gonna go roam and kill the mid lane. I'm gonna go roam and kill the top lane. It's like, why is Rakan in my lane? I'm playing 1v1 against Jax. And so you get a little nudge of playing your isolated 1v1s and 2v2s if everyone cares about their individual performance more than they care about their teammates' performance. Notice that AD carries never leave their damn lane, right? That is the only role that doesn't roam, is the AD carry, because they're the one role that we actually know scales really strongly with gold, and everyone else actually does stuff. Now, to be fair, I roam a lot when I play Twitch. Really love playing Twitch. It's great. And even though Twitch actually is a monster scaling with gold, he's also really good at roaming. So it's like the only AD that can do it because he's just good at it. But obviously for everyone else is like, I maybe go for Dragon, but I'm taking just resets for tempo, right? And then everyone else is just like, everyone else is moving around. AD carries like, I'm gonna hit these same 6 minions every 30 seconds. And so to me, like, nudging agency, nudging scaling, nudging caring about yourself more, I think is reasonable to like shift power in that way. Like per point of power, right? If we say Tom Kench top or Orianna mid or whoever, we say you have the same win rate, you have the same overall power level, but that power level shifted into you caring about your gold income. I think that can be a very compelling direction for the game to move in that direction. And similarly for AD carries, you're like, well, you're going to scale with gold less well, but you're going to get one shot by Yasuo a lot less often because you get more XP or something, or your like baseline durability is nicer, or I don't know, right? Like Infinity just has 50 health on it. That's not a good idea, like, to be clear. But that shape, I think, has some merit. There's a lot talking about we're nerfing Tom Kench, or we nerfed Tom Kench last patch, but I'm using the patch previews as a way to talk about a lot of theory on stuff because I find them fun, and hopefully patch rundowns are much more about like, here's what we're doing, here's why we did it, let's move forward. I like talking about the stuff, really what it comes down to. All right, let's talk about the fact that on the live pod, we are working on some long-term project right now. Of course, the patch we're working on is a pretty small patch. There's not a lot going on. That's because we are working on longer-term stuff. And so most of my designer's time has been spent on stuff that you're not going to see in the patch notes for a while. So I am writing the balance frameworks for the next season. The primary ones are the balance framework for items and the balance framework for champions. And this is, to generalize it pretty well, what are the kinds of things we should look at and care about when we're deciding, should we rebalance or redesign an item, a suite of items, a champion, a set of champions? What do we think warrants nerfing? What do we think warrants buffing? What do we think warrants a kit update? When do we think, items are correctly tuned? When are they under-tuned? Whatever. And exploring what we think that should be. Now, of course, we have documentation for what we want to do the seasons before and before and before, but it's saying, hey, right, technically, new design leadership, that is me, and hey, here is the approach I think we should take to game balance in the new year. As a bit of a spoiler, I'm trying very hard to push towards gameplay quality, and not look, and to be fair, like, we don't aggressively look at win rates, but a push towards gameplay quality and a sort of more firm push away from win rates. They are useful. Like, to be clear, I think players can easily feel a 46% win rate or a 54% win rate very easily. And I know that like a 52% win rate in Malphite in Elite does not feel like a 52% Riven in Elite. And the opposites can be true for other types of champions, right? Zed and Brand feel very different in low elo, despite having 4% win rate difference. Brand is way more palatable for the average silver player than Zed. Despite winning way more games, people are more chill with this. But I don't think 55% win rate Brand is healthy anywhere. So like, there are limits, and there have been limits anyway. Like, this is not like suddenly brand new stuff, but overall, like, a significant portion of my last 2 weeks was spent doing this, and a significant portion of my next several weeks will be spent on this as well. We're also doing design changes that will ship in 14.1. Seasonal pod is, of course, doing the big stuff for seasonal, but this is stuff where it's like, hey, this is highly volatile, this matters. There's been changes that we thought were going to ship in 14.1 that we cut because it didn't work out, or we no longer needed to hit those goals anymore, and there wasn't a way to salvage it, even if the gameplay was fun. And so there's some work that like we spent time on that you will never see. Because we did exploration and it was promising, and then we realized we don't need it, or we don't want it, or whatever. But there are going to be some things probably what we have is testing well. There are going to be some changes coming out of the live pod into 14.1 that I think are good for the game. That, you know, is stuff they're working on that you won't see for a while. Similarly, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but since Summoner's Rift team is one team, we have X number of designers, X number of QA, X number of software engineers, etc., X number of producers, the list goes on, VFX, etc. When you are concepting, let's say, a new item, you don't need icon art, you don't need VFX, you don't need sound effects, you hook up designer art, you draw a new icon in MS Paint, and you go. And then eventually you say, okay, well, we actually think this one is validated, this is a good item, we should add this item to the game. We now need a real name, we need to bring in narrative, we need a real icon, we need real particles, we need new sound effects, we might need engineering support to build this one correctly, or who knows what. So, hey, we need resources, and so these resources move over, which means on LivePod, we have fewer resources, and so we have less engineering support, and we have less QA support, and that means we can't do as complex or far-reaching of projects. And so, until maybe like 14.3, I'm making it up, I don't really know, LivePod will probably not be doing very high-scope changes, unless they are very simple and don't require special support. In general, but I know that QA is a little taxed. Like even the Janna kit update, I did some very late rescripts in this patch that was like, hey, we're gonna have a hard time getting coverage and everything. Like we really need to go low scope, or it has to be really, really valuable. And it's like, cool, we can wait for 2 or 3 months to do high scope stuff. That's okay. But it's like, hey, letting you know, by the way, that this is a reality of how the team works. There are also other projects that you will not see. And I am being intentionally vague here, but there are other projects, longer-term projects that the live pod is working on that, again, will not see the light of day for a while, but are useful. This is, again, talking about the fact that we are the live pod, not the balance team. There's a bunch of stuff that will affect the live game that is relevant that maybe will always be behind the scenes. It's like, oh, we're just going to, like, re-architect. I don't know how spells work. I'm not saying it's what we're doing, but, like, that's the kind of stuff where it's, like, it's not going to be patch notes, but it's, like, worth it, and it makes development way easier, but it's the kind of stuff that we actually might do, you know. So, hey, this is a very small patch, at least relative to other patches, but also we are working on other stuff because we don't have the bandwidth to maybe even like validate more large scope kit updates like we've been doing in the recent past. Okay, let's finally talk about this patch. We are 51 minutes in, and I'm talking about the first change going into the patch itself. Yeah, okay, so let's talk about turret gold. So I built these changes, just so I can give like more context here because I thought through this stuff. We are changing how gold is rewarded from turrets on Summoner's Rift. So the tier 2 turrets have 125 gold shifted from global into local gold. So instead of giving 50 gold to every player on your team, it gives 25 gold to every player on your team. Minus 25 times 5 players, that's 125. But that 125 is going into local gold. So statistically, the role that earns the most gold from turrets is the top lane. Then it's bot lane, to be fair, then mid, then jungle and support. So by shifting turret gold into local gold, also statistically, the champs who kill turrets also statistically most often a top laner. Same track record, right? Same stack rank, I should say. So the whole point of this is to be a very small top lane agency buff. This doesn't necessarily make split pushing stronger, because we're not actually increasing the total gold reward of killing top lane tier 2 or bot lane tier 2, or if you're winning the game overall, mid lane tier 2. And in fact, if all 5 of you are there for the turret kill, literally nothing changes. You all just share an equal share of 800 or 550 gold. But if you are split pushing and doing this, you're actually feeding your AD carry and jungler less, but you yourself are rewarded more for winning lanes and being individually dominant. The structure, I think, is probably most promising for chasing down top lane agency is twofold. It's personal power, and I'm going to phrase it as team connectivity. This is the idea that if you are winning, you should be winning for yourself. I think this was one of the best things we did in the 0.20 update was nerfing Drakes, where it says, okay, if your bot lane's winning, they're winning because they're getting kills, they're earning gold. The dragons they're getting from bot lane prio are going to be less valuable. It might pay off at 25, 30, 35 minutes with a dragon soul, but it's not going to be like, the bot lane is so important, they're also making top lane win. Kind of feels bad. And it means that, like, if you're winning your lane and the enemy bot laner kills an Infernal Soul or Infernal Drake, and now your opposing Riven has like 5% bonus AD, you're like, why does she have a free longsword? What the heck? I earned this kill. Why did they get this? So I think, that's reasonable there. And so I am a fan of pushing these resources onto yourself. So the idea is, if you are winning, you can feel better about the things that you are achieving for yourself. Now, you're achieving it for your team as well. They're getting some gold. And in addition to the fact that that's happening, you're also, creating some more map pressure, right? The lane is now less safe. There's more dives available. There's more chase available. All this stuff certainly matters. You're achieving map-wide power no matter what. But what you are doing is empowering yourself. And I think that is really, really key. I think it's funny because the naysayer comments I saw on the subreddit was like, wow, Riot's really undoing that durability, not that durability in this case. Riot's really undoing those anti-snowball changes, aren't they? And I wish that people would be more, I don't know, considerate is maybe the term. Like, changes aren't black and white. I want to talk about this for a little bit because design is... There are very few slam dunks in design. Everything you're doing is a trade-off. So, for example, let's say we buff Immortal Shield Bow next patch. And we're going to make 80 carries more by buffing Immortal Shield Bow. Okay, well, this increases the amount of player choice. It hurts assassins. They're going to be worse at killing 80 carries. It also lowers the amount of damage that 80 carries deal because they're on average buying a more defensive item instead of an offensive item. They're buying it instead of LDR, they're buying it instead of Bloodthirster. That's an impact. Right? Something like these 4 or 5 different things all happened. Oh, 80 carries are more likely to have lifesteal. That's a change, right? And there's a bunch of knock-on effects by making a change. And, you can consider all of them, and you might consider some more valuable than others. Hey, we're buffing Stridebreaker to make fighters scale better with gold. This also happens to make junglers stronger. This raises jungle agency, but it also raises all fighters' agency. It raises their gold scaling, which means they have more say over who wins the game. Okay, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It also happens to buff junglers, which is like not the most important thing. In fact, we'd rather nerf junglers right now. It's more okay now. We've got jungle in a pretty decent state. Don't want to dive on that too much. But yes, you can always find the other externalities that happens when you make any given change. That's fine. That's how stuff works. There is not an exact perfect level of snowball that cannot be changed. It must be exactly this number. One, it changes with MMR anyway, and it changes with the champions played anyway, right? If we move from playing a bunch of Jax and Rumble to playing a bunch of Malphite and Ornn, the game snowballs less, period. There just is less snowballing if people play more tanks, because it's one less role that scales with gold. So obviously, like, Malphite Ornn just doesn't snowball as a lane, whereas Riven Jax does. So of course, if, like, by making Riven stronger this patch, by the way, we're buffing Riven this patch, the game is going to be more snowbally, because Riven is a snowbally champion, is going to be in more games. Like, there is no, like, perfect number, because it will change no matter what you do. If we do literally nothing, Faker makes a play at Worlds and Azir's pick rate doubles, and suddenly that changes how stuff works. Every mid laner gained win rate because bad Azir players are playing against them. Congratulations, a bunch of mid laners gained win rate this patch. We didn't do anything. So I urge you to not be precious about any one thing, because any design change is a trade-off by definition. You are getting something, you are giving something away, and the goal is to take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, 5 steps forward, 1 step back. That's the ideal, right? Is to get as much as you can for as little as possible. Now, in the case of tier 2 turrets, they're not even worth more gold. I think it's hard to claim that this change, this individual change, is snowballing up in League of Legends, because the total gold amount hasn't changed. It's gone into the hands of the side laner who spent the effort to go do it, and they get paid for it. They feel better about killing this turret. They are having more fun. But what's not happening is they're not feeding that gold to their teammates. They're feeding it to themselves, and their teammates don't notice anyway. They're never going to care. So this change is like strictly fun positive. No one feels this. The top laners do feel this, right? This is like strictly fun positive. It might be snowballing positive, because putting gold all in one source is usually pretty powerful. but putting gold all in one source is the best version of snowballing. I would much rather you have 500 more gold than to give your entire team 100 gold worth of bonus attack damage from a dragon. I would much rather you have this gold than have it be diffused across the team in a way that isn't feelable. Like, this is just better for the game. And the comment is like, guess they don't care about the snowballing update anymore. It's like, how do you not have the ability to critically think about anything beyond this like tiny myopic thing? That's wild to me. On a similar boat, there was like all the comments of like, Riot instantly undid the durability update. Like, I have the data and the numbers on time to kill, on snowballing, on game length, on kills per game, and it was like, it was up here. The durability update happened, and then it got like maybe halfway back by the time we did snowballing update. It's like, yeah, we did undo some of the durability update. To be fair, the durability update went too hard and it made assassins non-viable, and so there was an immediate change in like 2 patches. I think it was 12.12 or 12.13 or whatever that like immediately undid some of the durability update, intentionally so, and then it drifted up a little bit from there. And the like refrain was like, wow, Riot instantly undid the durability update. It's more lethal now than after. It's like, no, it's not. It's clearly not. Like, I have the numbers. I know it's not. But everything is like all or nothing on social media, and it's like, stop. This is not true. I need you to be a little bit better about this. Now, there is a direct change, a direct buff to tier 3 turrets. Inhibitor turrets are only worth 300 total gold. Next turrets worth 250, but next turrets are in front of the Nexus. It doesn't matter what they're worth. But inhibitor turrets are basically not worth taking. Now, inhibitors themselves are also really not worth taking. That's not the solve here. That's not the point of this. This is to say that if you want to risk going for an inhibitor turret itself, if you're going to risk yourself that much, you can get paid for it. You can get paid a total of 500 gold across your team. It's 350 to you. No, sorry, it's 400 to you, right? It's plus 325 local. It's already 50 local. So it's 375 local and then another 25, so 400. And then the other 100 is spread across the other 4 people in your team. And this will increase snowballing some, but it will happen, on average 22 minutes in the game when the first inhibitor turret falls. But it means that there is a goal worth pursuing, right? There's a goal worth pursuing as a split push to say, actually, it's worth me risking opening the inhib because the turret kill is at least worth more gold than my champion death, which is not great. You shouldn't die for a turret typically, but at least it's there. But it's like, yeah, you know what? You risk it to go for this play, go get paid. And this will not change snowballing much because by the time you're killing an inhibitor turret, you're probably already winning by so much this gold doesn't matter very much. Like, on average, it's really not going to change the results of games much, but it will feel way better. Now, the comments I've seen are people like, oh my gosh, Hullbreaker, oh my gosh, all the stuff. And like, hey, I think perma-split pushing is not a very fun way to play out the game. Like, perma-split pushing. Split pushing some is required. There are 3 lanes. You should play to all of them. That's how the game works. I'm not saying Hullbreaker is perfectly balanced, but I am saying that split pushing needs to be part of the top laner repertoire. I also think them afterwards, I'm going to stop highlighting because I'm just being annoying here. I think afterwards, joining your team and being part of the fights, being part of the Baron hit, being part of the Dragon hit, being part of all that stuff, and saying, okay, I'm running TP, I'm going to go split push to the opposite side. Okay, Dragon's coming up. You know what? We're going to bring the TP in early. I brought their Ignite top laner over. I'm going to TP. We're going to fight before we're going to take Dragon right away, or Baron right away, or whatever. Or they do have TP. Okay, I'm going to lock them up here, right? Their top laner is stronger. I'm going to try to lock them up. I'm going to try to make sure they can't TP. I have to play in their face, and I have to like risk it to make sure they can't TP and to take the fight. Like, cool, great. There's like team context reliant interactions from top laners, and it's not just who has a Hullbreaker who kills the inhibitor first. Like, cool. I think like that level of shape is good. Like, maybe it's correct that every top laner has access to TP just because it's the role you picked at 20 minutes, and it's I don't know, right? Or there's like permanent hex gates that connects top lane to other lanes after some amount of time. I don't know, right? But I do think some level of connectivity is very useful here, but I also think being able to play your side lane out pretty fairly and get your rewards for doing good things like killing tier 2 and killing tier 3 is also really valuable. This is a complex topic. It's hard to get right. It's hard to get the right things here, but I'm happy to continue to inject agency into top lane by increasing the gold scaling, by increasing individual rewards for things you do well, and trying to unwind. This is what we did with the snowball update, right? Unwind the team snowballing that happens like around bot, specifically with things like Dragon, right? I think overall good for the game, fun, positive for side laners. Overall, I think this is a good change. Okay, there is a very, very small kit update to Azir. His W now applies on hits to the primary target attacked. There are some compensation nerfs to his W. So this is a change that primarily comes from the Arena team, from modes, from the modes team for Arena, to open up more build breadth for Azir, to let him go use Rage Blade and Hurricane and Kraken and all these things to let his soldiers do the stuff. There's of course a chance that Azir, as a marksman mage hybrid kind of, turns out he has a weird Kraken Slayer Hurricane build, and who knows, like maybe his soldiers should crit for some reason. Probably not. That's certainly not happening here, to be clear. Basically, the expectation is that this is roughly win rate neutral. His most common builds right now are Nashor's Tooth. What's interesting, and this happened in the kit update I did back in 13.5, I wanted to make Nashor's Tooth less of a trap. Data has always indicated, and pro player performance preferences has also always indicated, that Nashor's Tooth was a low elo noob trap. You weren't supposed to build it. He got more than enough attack speed already. And so part of what I did with the kit update was I gave him less free attack speed to make the stat line of Nashor's Tooth reasonably good, giving him a better AS ratio, giving him less free attack speed, and various other sources to say that actually, if you build the stat line of Nashor's Tooth, it's at least closer to Shadow Flame in terms of total throughput, because clearly players think it's on fantasy, they clearly want to buy it, and so let's make it less bad. It's still not the correct item to buy on Azir in the current version of League of Legends, despite what Azir mains may have told you in a badly edited video by quoting pick rate and win rate data, which, by the way, reinforced what I said about Shadow Flame still being better than Nashor's Tooth. It's wild. People are not critical thinkers. But Nashor's Tooth is still underperformant compared to other builds. Anyway, this change will, of course, make Nashor's Tooth a much stronger item. In fact, there's basically a direct compensation. They say that if you build Nashor's Tooth, you are essentially buffed by 50%, and if the other targets that you are hitting because of the changes is nerfed by 50%. What I mean by that is, like, let's say you do N damage on live, and next patch you still build Nashor's Tooth, you will do N plus 1. Whatever that is, you're going to do N plus 1 damage, and so your single target damage is strictly higher. Azir just simply does more damage with Nashor's Tooth, with primary target, than before. That is just true. That is just how it works. In the other targets that he is stabbing with the W, those targets are all taking N minus 1 damage. That's basically the way the math works out. Is that this is single target damage up, AoE damage down, assuming you're going for this build. Now, if you're going for a Shadow Flame build, is obviously strictly win rate negative. I think the end result will be that Nashor's Tooth Azir builds will roughly tread water, and non-Nashor's Tooth Azir builds will obviously just strictly lose win rate. I'm guessing around 1.25%, 1.5%, maybe around there, maybe less. But it's going to have an impact, obviously. This might make Nashor's Tooth mandatory. What's nice is it's actually set up in a way that is very clean, where we can, on Summoner's Rift, just tune the on-hit ratio. Right now, this ratio is 50%. You will deal 50% damage from on-hit effects from the soldier, which means you're getting half of the Nashor's Tooth, which also means if you buy a Lichbane, doing a WQ auto will only apply half Lichbane damage, because we are very concerned over Azir going back into a Q poke build. I specifically suggested the 50% modifier. The designer who did these changes was like, I'm on board, this makes sense. I know we were concerned about that, so sure. And basically we just have this as a Azir-specific tuning lever to say, if Nashor's builds are too dominant and they completely crush choice, like, we expect this to be his most common item because it's on fantasy, that is fine. But if we want to say, hey, let's not crush choice entirely, let's just make it, like, pretty good, but you can choose to skip Nashor's if you want, this is a one-line change. We change 50 to 30 to 27 to 48 to whatever number it needs to be. It's a very easily now accessed tuning lever, and great, right? So that's wonderful stuff. So overall, a kit update to Azir, which just says your W now applies on hit effects, and it means that it will do things like fire Hurricane bolts. It will apply Sheen, it will apply Energize, all that stuff. Let's move on. Let's talk about K'Sante. K'Sante is getting nerfed this patch. Let's first talk about where he's at and where he's going. I talked about it in the previous patch preview. The patch preview for 0.22 said that from the couple of days of data that we had, his win rate in Masters Plus was around 50.5, 51, which was fine. We were willing to let K'Sante sit at around 51 in Masters Plus and wait to see. and see what players did with that, because we knew he was really overpowered on day one of 13.21. We micropatched him because we knew he was very overpowered. We knew it was so strong we wanted to micropatch him, right? We have done very few micropatch balance updates this year. This was one of them. We were aware that Conte was really, really overperforming, and we micropatched him just for balance. No significant bugs for that. It was just for balance. And then we're like, okay, he's like 50.5, 51 at Masters. Cool. And then by the time reactive balance rolled around, it hadn't really moved, so we were fine. We were leaving him there. And then by the time the patch shipped in 0.22, players got better at the champion. He gained more win rate, and he's sitting at more like 52, 52.5, which is like, that's higher than we want him to be. That is above what we think is reasonable for K'Sante with what we expect to see out of his kit, how much A to Z he has, how much counterplay he has. We think he's not really allowed to be a 52 and change top laner in ultra high elo. So we want to bring him back down to 50.5, right? Because the only elo he's going to really perform at is going to be really high elo. He's very hard to play. This will always be true, but that's because he is a high skill cap champion. No one in Silver expects to be really good at K'Sante day 3, and so of course they are going to be aware there's a mastery curve. That's totally fine. That's totally reasonable. That's intended. That's an expected result of these changes. But he's overtuned, and as any champion, most champions' kit shape breaks down when they're overtuned. That's just how this works, right? Expected windows of counterplay don't exist when they beat you in their windows of weakness, right? If K'Sante is good at all-inning you, and he's good at short trading you, and he's good at playing poke wars, and he's good at team fighting, and he's good at all these things because the numbers are too high, then he has no weaknesses. But if the numbers all go down by 2% win rate or whatever, and it's like, oh, he's not good at short trades, he is good at all-ins, he is good at team fighting, he's not good at engaging. Oh, he has weaknesses now. They were covered up by being overtuned, but now they're not. And so it is important, as another sort of point of feedback kind of thing, where it's like, hey, tuning can cover up kit weaknesses and vice versa, right? If you are undertuned, none of your strengths can show because you never get to show them, right? So it is important to try to decouple numbers tuning from kit shape, from gameplay quality, because I agree, when K'Sante is overtuned and reasonably well mastered, there are very few weaknesses on his kit anymore, which is what happens when he is overtuned in high elo masters, and this is what we're seeing right now. Indeed, he is doing too well there. He deserves to be nerfed. So where he's at is he's too good. Where we're going is we are trying to continue to tune him into sub 51 in Masters Plus, keep him there, let players build mastery. It's worth noting that, of course, the champion is overpowered, but his breadth and depth are almost as high as when he launched. Like, every champion has a ton of players who play them when they first come out, of course. And then people figure out if they want to play the champion or not, or whatever, and then it settles down somewhere. His numbers are almost back to launch numbers of, like, what is up with K'Sante. And I don't think K'Sante needs as many nerfs as launch K'Sante got back earlier. I am still bullish on the fact that I think we did good kit updates, that this kit can be put in a good spot where he doesn't have to be 44% win rate in low elo like Azir of 3 years ago was, or Rise of 6 years ago was. This champion can look more like a modern Azir or something, where it's like, yes, he requires mastery, he's wearing it on his sleeve, we know this, he has room for counterplay, he has weak matchups where he is counterpickable, you can't just blind this dude every game in pro play, we think we are moving in this direction, but we need to see him with proper tuning. We have yet to have a version of this K'Sante with proper tuning, and so we just kind of need that data. We have high elo players on the team who play this, like GM top laner plays against GM top laner. Like, they played this going into the 13.20 update, and they're like, yeah, we think he's actually pretty good. He needed some buffs, sure, but like, the kit shape was good. They're like, no, this feels skillful. This feels like we have, like, you know, ways to play against. Like, that's the process, right? So where he's going is tuning to make sure, how is the kit shape? And if the kit shape is still really bad, there are things we can do to remove, to open up counterplay windows, to, you know, introduce worse matchups and whatnot. There's obviously things we can do to make sure the champion is in the right spot. Okay, so we are nerfing K'Sante. We are nerfing his Q mana cost finally. It's tough. So we made his W mana cost cheaper, which is, I think, very much the right choice. I think making sure he's not punished for using W. We want K'Sante to press W a lot in lane. This is, it is skillful, but it's the kind of skill that is obvious and appreciable, and that's a really good thing. It's an output where it's like, I understand I'm doing the right things. This is like Azir Shuffle, right? I'm a huge fan of Azir Shuffle. We're like, hey, it's skillful to do the right one. But like, Faker played this, and the dude's pick rate nearly doubled. You can tell it's skillful. All the illegal random crap that happened with Cassante at Worlds this year did not double his pick rate. I did this cool like EW ult cancel. Nope. Just kind of looks like a mesh of buttons, and it kind of looked like bullshit. I'm being a little aggressive here. I actually don't want to diss on initial Cassante. I think there's so much good in that first kit. I do think though that this is going in a better direction where he has more room for counterplay. But yeah, like I want the skill expression to be obvious and to feel like I was rewarded. I knew I did the right thing. Man, I immune this knockup. I feel really smart. I blocked this damage. I then set up my combo. I played the combo out well. Like, there's just stuff there that, like, I think can feel satisfying, can be really good here. But because his W got cheaper, he has fewer mana costs. And so, hey, he has a lot of spare mana now. Anyway, Rig and Q costs more mana. This basically just says, if you're in a bad lane where you have to Q to last hit, you're going to run out of mana. If you have to Q to last hit because your laning phase sucks, because you got countered, you deserve to have lanes that counter you that you lose lane in. If we want Cassandra to be a high gold scaling, high agency top laner, this means you have to have those high agency lanes that suck for you. Otherwise, you win all of them, or at least you go even in all of them, and you still get all of your gold. And so it is important that you do run a mana casting Q. However, Q is still the bread and butter spell that you're going to cast all the time, and so the fact that Cassante has very, very high mana growth, very high mana regen growth, and a relatively low cost Q by mid-game is intentional because he kind of has to have the Yasuo-esque pattern of, no, I'm actually casting Q on cooldown, I shouldn't be punished for this. That is important, that is valuable. We are also nerfing Q damage. If Cassante cannot get into melee range to do the auto attack afterwards, he is going to be weaker. We nerfed Q damage earlier in the 0.20 update. We're nerfing it again here to say, no, if all you're doing is queuing from range and trying to stay out, you are going to do this less well, and you're going to run out of mana. Your bad matchups are going to be worse. We're specifically trying to hurt his bad matchups. If you are able to get in range and use Grasp and use W and use Shield Bash and use your passive, you don't care about this as much. If you're able to earn gold and get a bunch of bonus armor on time and get your XP and everything else and use your ults, you won't care about this as much because it's a base damage change, not a scaling change. This is to say, your bad matchups need to feel bad to make the champion feel more fair. There's a bug fix at W where you can basically break out of it with Hex Flash. Hex Flash is really weird. I added a bunch of debug logic into this bug, and when you break out of your W with Hex Flash has not started casting. I put logic into the very first step of Hex Flash is print text in bright green into the game. That never prints. I also said, hey, is my W channel ending successfully, or is it getting canceled? And it's ending successfully. The game is interpreting it as I have successfully completed my channel when this happens. And also, Hex Flash isn't casting, so I can't add logic for if I fail the channel. I can't add logic for like, oh no, Hex Flash itself, because it's not even really casting the spell. It's very weird. I don't know what to really do here. The bug fix is not perfect, but it basically says if you do somehow get out of your W early, we're just not going to dash. Testing copiously locally. I know because there's just occasionally variance for some reason with how the game handles durations. This like minimum duration is generous enough that through regular gameplay, you will not run into this. But basically if you cancel out of W early by doing something that breaks the game, you would just not cast W. It's a little inelegant because you can technically still cancel. I still don't know why. I cannot find it. I do not want to rescript the entire spell Hex Flash, so I'm not doing that. And instead, here's where we are. It might be the fact that a summoner spell that is a channel. I don't know. But either way, it is what it is. The next thing is a nerf to his E-Shield. This is gold scaling down, base value technically up. If you have a Doran Shield, it's a nerf straight up. And then if you have like 2 items at level 14, it's still, or like 1 item and like any grasp stacks, it's still a nerf. We are functionally nerfing the shield on E, unless you are fairly low econ and very high level. But essentially, except for maybe rank 4 or 5 of the ability, this is just a nerf to the shield flat out. Highly skilled players use the shield better than low skilled players. That's not necessarily a problem, but it is certainly a way to target high elo play. It's still a good shield. It still blocks damage. It's still a good use of your mana. You should still cast this, but it's the kind of thing that we know highly skilled players use better than low skilled players. And hey, if we want to preserve his power level in low elo, then we nerf the thing that highly skilled players use better. I think that's reasonable to do. I don't think there's anything really wrong with that, with bridging the gap somewhat. We're not going to get to the point where Cassante has a, Garen win rate curve where he's better in low elo. It's never going to happen. We are specifically trying to not do that. We are not close to doing that. We expect them to have more of an Azir curve than a Garen curve by any means, but hey, we know the shield is unfortunately well used by strong players, and so it's getting weaker. The other changes are to making his level 6 all-in worse. Some of his bad matchups are played by just spacing with Q for a long time, waiting to level 6, and then all-inning with just a bunch of power at level 6. Basically, by putting a lot of the power into the ranks of the abilities and a little bit less from gold scaling, this means level 6 itself is a power spike. Now, I value having level 6 be a power spike. I think that's actually very valuable. I think it's very useful to say my ultimate is good and reliable and a strong surge in power. I think that is good to have. I'm a fan of having good ulti rank scaling and having there be a power spike with R. I think that is useful. This power spike is just a little bit too high, and it's a little bit too immediately at level 6. So this diffuses it a little bit, where it's just a small amount of less bonus AD, so that you just get less power the second that you press R. And I'm basically pushing the passive amp through R, the true damage conversion bonus damage. I am basically stretching that out linear by character level instead of just capping at 6, then at 11, then at 16. So that the level 6 power spike isn't quite as good, but it's much, it's closer at 7, 8, 9, 10. At level 10, it's technically better. At level 6, it's obviously worse. Then at 11, of course, you hit the new breakpoint, so it's worse again. This is overall a nerf, to be clear, to the champion, but it's saying, okay, you have a suite of matchups where you lose the lane, but then you flip the lane at level 6 and you win a lot of these. You are going to flip the lane and not win at level 6. So if you have a bad matchup, you still have the bad matchup. It's not wait 5 minutes then win the matchup. It's no, they're going to beat you. They're still going to beat you. That is the entire point here. And so kind of pulling that out some. Janna is getting some buffs because she's not doing all that well. As mentioned earlier, there are room for buffs here. There is room for players to optimize their builds a bit better. The W cooldown nerf was one we added very much last minute due to power concerns. Yes, we were wrong. It happens, whatever. We're human. But W cooldown was a nerf we shipped last minute because we thought Janna was going to be OP. She wasn't, so it's the easiest thing to add right back in. Next thing was a change I meant to do. I did not know how to do it. I got some help. Now I know how to do it. I changed the W back to the version that was in 2017. Which instead of being a normal spell where it casts from her center to her target's center, and that is how target selection is chosen, it will cast from her edge to her target's edge, which is how basic attacks work. So the cast range is technically down by 100, but because it's edge to edge, it is actually better attack range unless I think maybe if someone is whimsied or Trundle ulted, they get smaller, and there's going to be a couple of very small cases where it technically could be a nerf. But in realistic terms, this is actually a 20 range buff against Annie, and a 60 range buff against Cho'Gath, and then more than that if they have Heartsteel or Cho'Gath ulti stacks or whatever. So functionally a strict buff to W. It now always matches auto attack range, which is a good thing. Now again, in most cases, it was already very close to auto attack range, and you wouldn't often feel this, but now it definitely is matching auto attack range, which is a buff in all cases, some cases small, some cases very large. And then just a very small buff, mostly for win rate magnitude, because I think Janna can sustain about 2% of win rate lift here. I'd like to get her back to her old win rate and then say, hey, how does she feel at the same power level? We know being more powerful, less powerful clearly influences pick rate, of course. But so if we really want to do a good job and say, hey, did we really do the right thing? Do players like this version of the kit? Are players voting with their time? We need to get her to the power level she was before. Let us soak in data and say, actually, can this Janna sustain 53? Is that actually okay for her? Because she's still low agency and not oppressive and whatnot, or is this not okay, right? Oh, actually, there's one more change I forgot, which is the passive damage. There's one more change, which is one thing we observed with Janna is that she actually has a much worse early game than before. She was already a fairly scaling champion. She had kind of weak laning phase and a really good late game. And now she seems to have a really bad laning phase and a pretty good late game. And I want to soften that somewhat by flattening out the passive, basically making it better levels 1 through 10. Deanna doesn't reach past level 16, so it doesn't really matter what's late game. But saying, okay, let's, between the cooldown and the damage and the cast range a little bit, you're going to have a lot more agency over your laning phase. It's going to feel a lot better. You're going to do a lot more. Your autos are just doing more damage. Your W is doing more damage and is more usable and more often. And then Just one thing to note is that because we removed the heal and shield power from the E passive and changed it to E cooldown, that only affects the E. The heal and shield power also affected her R, but instead of just making the R more powerful, because the R is so often used like just out of combat as a heal because we're doing Baron or whatever, I said, you know what? This is a really reasonably fair ultimate that she can't use proactively very often. Her team has to be low, or they have to be in a team fight. She can't go like she can't aggressively use a cooldown buff in the way that like Ornn or Malphite or Riven or Azir or Xerath or Ziggs can aggressively use a cooldown buff. Janna kind of can't. So this is going to be a lower magnitude buff than a proactive ultimate. Nocturne, another example here, TF, whatever, what have you. But say, okay, well, if you are a reactive ulter, I think it's reasonable for you to have a sort of normal ult cooldown instead of like long ult cooldown. Janna's ult is one of the longer ult cooldowns in the game, and I think considering that she, again, can't use this on cooldown whenever she wants, I think it's reasonable to let it be, I mean, now it's going to be more like a normal ult cooldown, I think it's fine, but there's a world where Janna deserves to have actually like on the shorter end, which, maybe is fine here. But regardless, I think this is a reasonable change. So these are, of course, a lot of lines, right? This is like quite a lot of power to Janna. 1 second W cooldown, 30 cast range on W, like these are very, very small. 3 more on hit damage in the passive is not a ton of power. Like, it's 4 small lines. I mean, there's a chance it gets wrong and it's like 3% win rate somehow, and it's like, crap, we overbuffed Janna. That is possible. It of course can happen here, right? I think it's unlikely, but again, the logic behind these changes is Janna. And we have a big suite of miscellaneous balance changes. So as mentioned maybe earlier, Briar basically did not change win rate last patch. So we're doing 2 changes here. One is actually a revert to the day 1 or day 0 micropatch to Briar. I'm not 100% sure this is exactly the right choice, but this was added to basically add a little bit of foolproofing to the champion. Because of course she's kind of hard to play. But I consider it valuable to say that Briar, I think, should probably have on the low end base health. So one thing that is true about Briar is that she is more performant on lethality builds than on fighter builds, and if I can close that gap, I would like to. This means I'm generally going after spell damage. It generally means I'm going after durability that can be washed away by buying bonus health. So I'd rather nerf health than armor, for example, because armor would affect all builds kind of equally. Bonus health washes away base health changes and health growth changes. So the point here, anyway, is to say that though I think this buff was correct when it happened because Briar was harder to play, people have gotten up there on the mastery curve. And by the way, like the E change, making it better at healing and having it a lower cooldown, I think was like a completely very good change, and should just stay with the kit, right? I think it's a very good change that she's more easily able to break out because that just helps with the learning curve. As I really have something in my eye, which is kind of annoying. Okay, let's try to focus. But by saying, okay, you are going to be baseline squishy, the ability for someone to burst you back in a lethality build goes up when you have less health. This obviously means you're full health every time in your jungle clear, but when you are fighting your opponent 1-on-1 or 2-on-1 or 3-on-2 or whatever, you have 20 less health for that fight, which means a little bit more often they can fight you back and win, or peel you and win, or something. It does a little bit, it does something. It's not massive, but it is a nudge that should do something. The other change is simply to the active damage on W2. This is how much missing health damage comes out. I think this is also skewed towards Halo Blade lethality builds, because the more damage Briar can cram into the first 3, 4, 5 seconds, the more this execute damage does. And if her combat profile is more spread out because you're playing Conqueror, or just aren't doing Halo Blades autos, you're not scaling your burst damage with a bunch of lethality, then W2 is a smaller portion of your power budget. Because they're just not getting low enough, and it's, the rest of the chase down that matters more, or something else. And so I think directionally this helps us, once again, close the gap between the two. We know W2 damage is actually a large portion of her total output. And so hopefully this gets us what we want, but these should be things that she directly will feel. She will feel this from level 1. This will actually slow her jungle clear down a little bit, because, of course, she puts, damage on her jungle camps, and so if they are missing, let's say 800 health and she presses W, and it's like, let's say it's 1% less missing health, well, that is 8 less damage on the active. Is that huge? No, but it is used once per camp, which adds up. And once in a while can actually be enough where it's like, we cost you another auto attack. You are a full 1.5 seconds slower on your clear every time you need one more auto attack to finish off a camp, right? And this matters. It does something. It has an impact. We hopefully get the win rate magnitude that we want. I don't think Briar's the kind of champion that should have a privileged win rate. She's around 53% right now. That seems very, very high. This, seems very reasonable to unwind to some degree. Jarvan is not strictly winning too many games. His win rates are fine, but again, the goal of Life Pod is not numerical balance. It is game quality, it is enjoyment, and honestly, a bit of just freshness, I think, is a valuable thing to chase down. Jarvan has been a top performer for a long time. We initially didn't actually have Jarvan on the targets here. This is actually Froxon coming in saying, actually, I think Jarvan is a more important target to nerf here. He thought it was one of the two most important targets to nerf, and so we pivoted out of a Nocturne nerf into a Jarvan nerf here, which is great. That's entirely his job to tell us what to do, right? That's the entire point of having a boss, and having, a lead gameplay designer is he's very high context and he, wants to be hands-on. That's great. I welcome that. But we're nerfing Jarvan, and basically it's acknowledging that, hey, we made a good Jarvan item. We made Spear of Shojin, and we tuned it to the point where it's finally good on a suite of champions. This means, though, that Jarvan's core build is very, 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 very high ability haste. Arguably too much. And so, okay, well, you have really, really high ability haste. We're going to nerf later ranks of your Q, because the degree to which you are casting Q is too frequent, and so take a nerf. I'm going to say here, it's a nerf to Jarvan, and, this acknowledges the state that Jarvan is in. I will defend this as the correct direction for things. It is important to tune systems first and then champions beyond them. Spear of Shojin should be allowed to be a viable item in League of Legends unless you believe that there should never be a 40 haste item in the game. If that's the case, that is fine. I think that is a defensible argument or stance to have. But in that we have a 40 haste item in the game, it should be useful on somebody, or why have the item at all? And so we tune the item to be useful on Hecarim. It's good on Jarvan. It's actually very, very good on a bunch of other fighters as well. It's actually under purchased, but very good on Nocturne, for example. There's a bunch of champions that can still buy Shojin that kind of aren't, that'll maybe learn over time, whatever. But regardless, okay, Shojin is now a viable item that is good that people can buy. Okay, well, we should now tune champions based on the fact that this item exists and based on people using it, which means Jarvan has too short of quotas what we think his kit should have, and so this happens. This is the inevitable result of tuning systems to be usable and then identifying what happens as a result and having stats like ability haste that can be stacked or anything else to this degree. That's just how things work. This having to happen is not a failing of the design of Spear of Shojin. This is just the inevitable result when we want to preserve gameplay quality and we have items that do unique things. There are only so many things you can do in the game, and we tune you downstream of systems. This is correct. This is what's going to happen. And I think this is very, very defensible. And I would encourage you, if you think that I'm wrong, to rethink it because I really think I'm right. Whatever. Okay. Next is Naafiri. Naafiri was designed explicitly to be fairly low agency and a low elo skewed assassin. Those were the explicit goals. And from what we can measure, this appears to be true. Now, Naafiri's current balance state is that she is around a 53% win rate mid laner and top laner in every MMR up through Emerald, or up to Emerald, I forget. Regardless, for like either 70 or 90% of players, something like that. But a large portion of players, actually, yeah, up through like Diamond. Like if you like average out like sub Emerald and like Emerald through mid Diamond. She is 53 in each of these clusters. She's very performant, very strong. And then even in high elo, if we're like Masters Plus, she's still about a 50% win rate champion. So there really isn't even a skill bracket where she is underperformant. Now, there could be a reasonable argument that says, well, if Naafiri is meant to be like late game scaling or low agency, she might deserve to have a privileged win rate. I think there is a totally fair argument there in the way that like, I think Rammus is allowed to have a privileged win rate. Amumu is allowed to have a privileged win rate by being a very easy champion. But with champions like Rammus and Amumu, they are privileged in low MR, but they are underperformant in elite level play. And I think that is probably the correct shape for champions like this. To me, if Naafiri is also winning a normal number of games in elite, she's just strong everywhere. And that sits a little uneasy with me. I mean, I don't think this is like, for sure we have to nerf Naafiri here. And I know I am kind of telling a little bit on win rates, but win rate is performance. Like, this is how champion is performing. And a champion that is performing literally everywhere. And Naafiri actually eats a lot of ban rate. So for a point of reference, Naafiri's pick rate is pretty much identical to that of Talon, and has 6 times Talon's ban rate. Now, Naafiri wins more games than Talon does. People tend to ban powerful things. But you have other champions like Zed, who wins fewer games than Naafiri and eats even more bans, right? And so, this is not to say that we should actually buff Zed, KEKW, Lamau, but it's to say that, like, well, okay, win rate matters, but also frustration matters, and also, to me, Naafiri's shape is one where it's like, actually, she's winning a lot of games, and players ban her a lot for how popular she is. Even though she does win a lot of games, it's still a very high ban rate for her popularity. I believe the Fury needs to go down a little bit because she is causing players to ban her. She is causing players to say that they think she's too good, enough to where I'm inclined to agree and say, look, she still needs to perform better in low elo than high elo. This is going to be true. She is going to be like a pretty strong champion in the hands of, you know, relatively unsavvy players or unpracticed players. She actually has a reasonably good mastery curve. Like there's a decent amount of growth here for this champion across the first like 10, 15 games, and it slows down pretty aggressively. But like the first 10, 15 game learning curve is actually pretty steep for Nefiri. But then you get there and it slows down. So it's like she's relatively easy to play. Like it takes a bit, but then you get there. Compared to like Riven, which is like a straight line for like 100 games. Yeah. Anyways, so to say, like, Nefiri should probably have a good observed win rate for most players. Like, that is actually true because she's actually relatively simple for an assassin and is low elo skewed. And that's just like, yes, if the champion is meant to have an audience at all, this has to be true. But a little bit overtuned. So there's that kind of that point here. So anyway, we are basically nerfing flat damages on the champion. This is, again, part of what I was talking about earlier about caring about how much you are able to play to each lane, right? I will tend to nerf gold scaling of bot laners. I will tend to preserve gold scaling of top and mid laners where I can, when it makes sense, when it's reasonable for the champion, and then do the contrapositive when needing buffs and needing, nerfs for the opposites. Yeah, so it's flat damage reductions here. I think so. We're nerfing the E2 damage. This is the end of the dash. I think that is going to be somewhat melee skewed. This is probably going to be more of a top lane nerf than a mid lane nerf. Of course, there are plenty of melee mid laners as well. Yasuo and Akali and Sylas and all these champions are quite popular. And as overall pack mate damage, I think it's very hard to track pack mate damage. I think it's a lot of power for its satisfaction. I think it's pretty easily overlooked. So things that like are not like really core parts of the kit, but just try to bring win rate down some, try to bring frustration down some, and still letting the Fury be a relatively strong champion overall. Next is a set of changes to Riven. I talked a bit about what I think Riven's problems might actually be earlier in the video. If you want to go check about, it was the section about feedback. But regardless, yeah, Riven is really only performant in Masters Plus. She's not great in most other skill brackets. The point here is really just to be like, hey, you know what? Let's just give Riven a bit more. Again, I'm buffing the gold scaling of a champion that is, not in bot lane. Again, directionally, just shifting the game, creeping the game in this direction. That is, a thing that is happening, of course, sure. But what am I trying to say here? Ultimately, I'm just trying to let sort of Riven pay herself off. What's nice is because her Q is a total AD ratio, this matters at level 1. She has, 50 some odd base AD, maybe it's 60, I don't remember. Doesn't really matter, but she has runes. She has a Doran's Blade in most matchups. Like, she's going to use this pretty well. And also just scale up with gold. So because this nerf matters from the early game, this means I'm sure there was some matchup somewhere where her kill threshold flips and now she's the winning lane. I'm not saying this suddenly means Riven is good in laning phase or that she has a bunch of winning matchups now. I don't believe that's going to be the case here. But it's two things. It's saying, well, your matchups got better because you do just have more damage at level 1, at level 2, at level 3, at level 4, at level 5, and so on. And if your matchup is bad, you can maybe do the level 6 ult for ult trade, and maybe that's going to be better. And so it's saying, look, in relatively isolated scenarios, and I think like our bonus AD is actually pretty valuable because you're going to use the entire thing. Like top lane fights at 6 are usually pretty long. They're durable enough. And she has the shield and everything else, and the bonus AD actually gives her more shielding, so actually like this R buff actually buffs her E as well. But it's just say like, yeah, you know what? This gives you more to do and says, okay, well, even if you're having a bad game or it's not like a matchup, whatever, here is somewhat guaranteed power that you can use at the push of a button from level 1, from level 6, and also, if you are doing well, here's gold scaling. I'm not trying to be too grandiose, like, this is not a huge buff to Riven, but it's saying, hey, trying to give you buffs in a direction that makes sense. It's also, for what it's worth, in a buff that is accessible. If you are bad at weaving her passive, it's Q damage, not passive damage. If you just need better wave clear, like you're not allowed to go Ravenous Hydra because the lane matchup is so bad, you're not allowed to buy 0 bonus HP for the first 3300 gold of the game. Okay. Q has better wave clear now. You have better AoE, and so maybe you can get through the lane without Ravenous as easily. Maybe. This was like some small things directionally, like does not like suddenly make Riven a low elo stomper or suddenly give her a flat mastery curve, but it's like, directionally going in this way is probably fine. We're nowhere close to flipping the script and triggering a Garen, We're nowhere close to that. That's fine. We're not trying to. Riven very clearly screams high skill cap, and we want to preserve that. That's important. We want unique champs to do unique things. Riven being highly skilled is a Riven thing. That's important. That helps you identify a champion that you want to play. The part of the reason that like League is such a good game is champions. Is you're opting into a very specific experience within the framework of League of Legends, the game. The point of tuning is to make sure that, you know, your options are often competitive with one another, where it's not like, well, I have to play Senna, she's just the best champion. It's like, well, no, you can play Riven. Okay, you have to be practiced, but you can play Riven as long as you have the practice. Instead of like, you only play Riven in these 3 matchups, and you need the practice, and you have to be able to close games out. It's like, that's, you know, again, I'm not saying we've solved all the problems and it's perfect now, but that's some of the logic behind these changes here, and directionally what we're going for here. Next thing is some buffs to Trundle. So he is getting attack damage growth. He's getting cheaper mana cost on Q. So I technically suggest both these changes, though I wasn't the only one to suggest mana cost. This one has been floating around for a while. Though I didn't do these changes to Trundle. Ultimately, the designer was like, yeah, okay, like these ones, these are fine. So the conversation I had was like, hey, I think Trundle should have much more AD growth. So the logic behind it is threefold. I think threefold. So one is, as a fighter, the class of fighters uses the base attack damage stat for a lot of their ecosystem. Steric's gauge is percent more percent. You get bonus AD as a percentage of your base AD. So whatever your base AD is, you get 50% of that as bonus attack damage. Stride Breaker and its requisite items, and Sheen and his requisite items all scale purely off base AD. Trinity Force's bonus damage on hit scales off of only base AD. And so the more base AD you have, the better you are at fighter items. I think that's actually very, very clever. I really like this, to say, actually, we're going to make sure this entire suite of champions called fighters, who we expect to build Iron Spike Whip, we expect you to build Sheen, we expect you to build items like Steric's Gauge, these are all going to scale off of base AD, which means you can't really like multiplicatively scale them, but we can say, this is an item for you. And you feel good about them because like Steric's gives like 60 attack damage sometimes. That's like, I mean, that's like almost mythic level. Like that's really high for an item that also gives a 900 point shield. Higher than that actually in a lot of cases. And so that level of stat binding, I think, is good and really worth chasing down and really worth having. And so it's like, hey, look, Trundle already buys Sheen items, but like let's really make sure he feels supported by the suite of fighter items. So let's make sure he has good, like strong A tier base / total, like base and growth attack damage. It's not exciting, but it's +1 attack damage growth, which is a lot. So we expect this to be quite a bit of win rate. The other reason this is good is top laners actually gain the most experience in the game. Top lane is the highest XP role, then mid, then jungle, then bot, then support. So any given XP scaling option is going to specifically scale low elo, because low elo also goes longer, so they gain more XP. So this buff matters more in low elo games and high elo games, but it also matters more for top lane, and Trundle top is performing worse than Trundle jungle. So through almost every axis, this is like a kind of a slam dunk change. It is not gold agency, other than you scale better with Sheen, you scale better on Iron Spike Whip. Like it's something, it technically has gold scaling, but like not in the way that I'm typically talking about it. But this does do a lot of really nice things. We're like, actually, yes, this helps systemic reinforcement, this helps role skew, this helps MMR skew, all these reasons why. Actually, you know, there's a lot of good reasons to do this change, but as I had said to the designers, like, if you have a more exciting change, there's more fun with Runner players, feel free. Like, this is not direction, this is just a suggestion that I think is good. Ultimately, he chose my suggestion. Okay, great. I said, you can do 1.0. And he's like, yeah, great, 1.0 AD. Let's do it. So one whole attack damage growth here, which should be quite a lot of win rate. He auto-attacks a lot. In top lane, he very, very regularly builds Trinity Force, which scales the Spellblade proc and the threefold strike bonus attack damage. So he's going to get a lot here. And the final one is just, hey, we know mana costs are a top lane thing and don't really matter in the jungle. Jungles have infinite mana, just like by nature. So cheaper mana cost means he's allowed to cast the spell more often and feel good. We can do the higher scope thing where we do the same thing we do with like Annie Q and Darius W, where it's like, we refund your mana cost, we refund part of the cooldown, and it's okay, you can just last hit with Q. Fizz W does as well. It's like, you just have a last hit spell. Enjoy. We could. That's a higher scope change. It's not necessarily required, but we could do it, right? Whatever. We are buffing Vel'Koz. So I want to talk about a couple things here. So we're buffing Vel'Koz. So I talked earlier about giving feedback, right? And my champion sucks is not enough. Vel'Koz is a performant champion. He's not extremely good, but he wins half of his games. This does not mean he's actually secretly great or secretly overpowered or whatever. Vel'Koz wins half his games. I want to once again try to dispel the rumor that pick rate is not mastery rate. That's not how this works. Surges in pick rate can be correlated with low mastery play. Obviously, Briar gets released, everyone's 0 games in mastery. Faker makes a play at Worlds, people show up and pick Azir, who are not good at Azir. Obviously, surges in play rate can change win rate, because you are flooding in low context, low mastery players. A resting pick rate does not have that problem. A high or low resting pick rate does not mean only mains are playing them. That's not how this works. It's never been how this works. Please, much like Elo Hell and Losers Queue don't exist, a low pick rate does not mean a high mastery rate. Stop. This is not true. None of these three things are true, so stop. Anyway, to move forward, please give better feedback than Vel'Koz sucks. Because Vel'Koz doesn't suck. He is okay. You could maybe say mediocre if you want, but he's fine, right? Not every champion can be about 50% win rate. He's at about 50%. So his observed performance is he's fine. Looking at his solo queue data, he does a relatively large amount of damage. He doesn't tend to die. He doesn't tend to take that much damage compared to other artillery mages like Xerath. Xerath tends to take kills better. He farms equally well. There's some mages like Syndra who farm better. Syndra's better at farming waves. Her spells are better at this. So, it could be like, actually, last hitting on Vel'Koz feels bad. And I don't get as much farm as I would want. And I would really rather play a champ where it's easy to farm with my champion. Like, that's useful feedback. That is nice. That is directive. That is like, here's what I don't like about my champion. But Vel'Koz sucks isn't true. It just isn't. It isn't true. He doesn't suck. He's just fine. He honestly wins about as many games as Orianna does. I'm sure the experience of playing Orianna, both as and against, is Orianna favored by the Vel'Koz favored. Vel'Koz also, by the way, actually softly counters Orianna. He's actually winning in that matchup. Whatever. But I totally buy if you're like, actually, here's experiential problems I have with Vel'Koz. And speaking of one, I want to bring up this idea that his E fizzles while he's dead. This isn't true. I've seen some really asinine comments where like, these dumbasses at Riot just won't give us QOL. Just fix it, forehead. I'm like, his E doesn't fizzle while dead. I checked. I went in and like slowed the game down to 1/8 speed. I was like, what's happening with... Oh, it works like every other spell in the game. If you die while actively casting the spell and your cast doesn't complete, you don't finish casting the spell. Welcome to League of Legends, where if you die while casting a spell, the spell doesn't cast. This is how Xerath Q works. This is how Xerath W works. This is how Xerath E works. This is how every other one of Vel'Koz's spell works. This is how Cho'Gath Q works. This is how Veigar W works. If you are actively casting the spell and the cast bar is still filling and you die, it stops filling and you stop casting the spell. An indicator shows up when your cast bar shows up, but you have not cast the spell. By the way, this is literally identical to Xerath W. Vel'Koz E and Xerath W, you press the button, an indicator shows up, a cast bar starts filling. If the cast bar finishes, it doesn't matter if you die or not, the damage will occur. The missile spawns in the case of Vel'Koz E, or the damage is just getting ready to explode for Xerath W. If you die while the cast bar is going up, neither the missile fires, nor does the explosion queue up for Xerath. These spells work identically, other than the fact that you can win while Xerath E. Maybe you think you shouldn't be able to win while Xerath E. That's fine. You can make that case. Whatever. Either way, they work identically. E does not fizzle while you're dead. E works like every other spell in the game. Syndra happens to be instant cast. That's a lot of power, to be clear. So this one does actually cast the second that it casts. It's instant. Of course, it's always going to clear. That's how spells work. It's instant cast. That's what happens. But Vel'Koz E does not fizzle while it's dead. Now, we could break form and say that actually Xerath E is instant cast but locks you into a cast animation and it's uncancelable and something else. We could, but that is a different spell and doesn't work like, I think, any other spell in League of Legends. Pretty much every other spell has a quarter second or half second cast time, and if you die while casting it, you don't finish casting the spell, which is how spells work. So I don't really enjoy the asinine comments from Vel'Koz mains who don't know how their own champion works because they're wrong. it's frustrating to get yelled at when they're just wrong about what they're talking about. Vel'Koz is a normal spell. Either way, we are buffing Vel'Koz. We are buffing his damage some. We are buffing the passive. We're trying to buff it in a way that will disproportionately help mid lane a little bit. It's getting some base level 1 value. It's getting some AP ratio, and it's getting some scaling value on character level. The changes are lightly level scaling skewed. And the AP ratio, because mid laners earn more gold than supports, is going to, of course, additively add more damage to a mid laner than to a support. I think level scaling is going to be the strongest version of that. Regardless, it is some power to Vel'Koz. It's not a ton. It's probably not a whole lot of win rate, but whatever. I mean, Vel'Koz isn't strictly weak. Now, it could be that, again, if you can give good, valuable feedback, we can talk about the things that feel bad about Vel'Koz. If E just feels too unreliable, okay. If W doesn't feel good in PvP, it's too delayed or whatever, okay. If R doesn't turn fast enough, if it feels like champions are too fast and you can't keep up with the targets and so the ult isn't reliable enough. Cool, these are all directional things where it's like, here's what feels bad about my champion, I'd have more fun if, these things felt better. That's the kind of feedback that is useful and, actionable and actually potentially accurate, other than my E fizzles while dead, aka it works like every other spell in the game, or my champion sucks, which is just also not true. So please, I urge you, give useful feedback. We are nerfing Ziggs. There's some weird stuff here. Ziggs is getting +1 AD. To be fair, this was sort of arbitrary. This came through via Arena. Arena merged in a set of changes this patch. Basically, semi-rescripting champions in a way that makes it so that we can do bespoke balance per champion. So the way this works, right? So in ARAM balance, for a long time, it was like, oh, well, this champion just does 10% less damage and takes 5% more damage. And that was kind of all they had. And we eventually got the tech to say, okay, as long as you define this and you name this a variable, let's say we're in Ziggs's queue and we have a variable called base damage. And we say base damage is equal to 50 times the rank plus 35. Okay, cool. We can then add a thing and say, hey, but also in Arena, base damage is this calculation instead. It's 35 times the rank plus 27. And then if you're in Arena, it says, oh, I'm going to take that one. And if you're not in Arena, it takes the basic one. And you can add one for ARAM, you can add one for Nexus Blitz, and so on and so forth. And so you can say, per spell, I can define behavior. Now, the idea of using functionally variables for this is relatively new tech. When I updated Janna in the previous patch, I converted her Q, W, and E into this system. I didn't touch her R. Her R is still the old way because I wasn't changing the ability, so I didn't want to rescript it just to do that for cleanliness. But now it means that if ARAM wants to change the damage per second charging scaling of Janna Q, they can do that with adding a mode override and saying in Arena, the damage per scaling of Janna Q is 1 per second, not 10 per second, because we actually don't want charge tornadoes to be good at wave clear or whatever. That's fine. I think there's even there's still a data value for a minion mod, and so it's at 100%, so it doesn't do anything. We don't have it in the tooltip. But if Arena wanted to say, or AM wanted to say, actually the minion mod for Janna Q is going to be 60% in this mode, override the number for 100%, 60%. Scripting's all still there, right? So cool stuff. Anyway, whether intentionally or not, Ziggs got +1 AD when Arena merged their changes in to say we've added all this functionality, we've done rescripting, we've added stuff in. There's actually a weird error where it happened to overwrite the 13.22 changes to Briar. We caught that. Briar's keeping the same numbers from 0.22 plus the nerfs in 23. But Ziggs came with +1 AD. Whatever, it's here. I don't care. This is very, very little power. Ziggs auto attack is very, very little. It doesn't really change anything. 55 AD is actually pretty normal level 1 mage AD, so whatever, he gets +1 AD. Okay. I don't really care. Now that the Q is more fair, we're taking down some Q damage. Basically, my experience playing as, with, and against Ziggs some. I haven't been a Ziggs aficionado recently, but the last few Clash tournaments I played, we played a lot of Ziggs bot, and I've played alongside it playing support. Turns out when you play a lot of Senna, people like to play mages with you, and so I've played with a couple of Ziggs bots fairly recently in ranked. But now that Q is much more reliable, it doesn't need to be nearly as deadly because it's a more reliable tool. I think overall, game health for Ziggs, a more reliable Q that is less of his power budget on a per spell basis, is actually probably a better version of the champion. So plus reliability minus damage is probably a totally reasonable shape for this skill overall. Considering that the Q has a fairly small hitbox and only a big explosion radius if you're near a minion functionally. There's like a lot of conditionals to whether Q is good or not. It's of course more reliable now, sure, but you know, even though it's faster and a slightly bigger explosion radius than Lux E, it's also way more conditional than the completely free target Lux E. So there's, you know, room on either side. Regardless, is all to say that Ziggs Q, by now being more reliable, can do a bit less damage and is overall probably more healthy for the champion. So bit of minus damage on the Q. My experience playing with and against and around Ziggs is that I think it is a pretty good way to nerf defensive tools to say that there is a very large cost to using them. That if you use it to escape a gank, you're going to be meaningfully set back by this, either because the spell is missing for a while, or because it just sets you back a meaningful amount of mana. What I have noticed in some of my bot lane Ziggs, or alongside bot lane Ziggs games, is that they will often use W as harass in any lane where they're not afraid. Because it's like, oh, well, I've actually got a pocket support, so I'm not, and we've got wards, we've got trinkets, so we're not really going to get ganked. And they're not playing Nautilus or Leona or whatever, they're playing a Enchanter, they're playing Renata, or they're playing, you know, who knows what. So actually, I can spam W as poke, and W is so reliable. It's very fast. It's pretty much unmissable. It triggers Comet every time. You get Scorched, you get Mana Flow Band. It's like, I've seen actually a fair bit of Ziggs spamming W as poke in bot lane. And so I suspect actually, though, of course, mid lane might be more afraid, I think mid lane Ziggs doesn't press the button very often. Because how often is Ziggs in mid lane actually getting engaged upon, right? Like, yeah, this can be used as a Yasuo disengage, but like maybe once per wave, in which case you have the cooldown back anytime. But if you're playing Ziggs in bot, Leona can try again pretty commonly. And so I think this is the kind of change that does disproportionately affect bot lane. Base durability had very little effects, but I think disengage tools probably mean a bit more in a lane where they're, you know, if they have no engage, you're using it for spam and for poke, and if they have engage, you actually need it kind of constantly. So the hope here is that these changes are bot lane skewed. So we went for a full 2 hours. To be fair, the first 50 minutes was not about the patch. The last 1 hour was for a patch with 10 changes in it. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.